Welcome to Kawaii's Kitchen, where the meals are hot, but the takes are even hotter. And today's special is difficulty adjustments. FF14's battle content is a ladder of increasing difficulty, starting from Overworld and Fate mobs all the way up to Ultimate. And as the rung you're on goes higher, the more complex the mechanics you come across become, and they require more teamwork and precision to complete. From just dodging basic circle and cone AoEs that have telegraphs that persist for an eternity or take minimal damage from them, going up to having to get force marched through a specific amount of landmines that are placed in a 3x3 grid sans one corner. And to make it even more mind-boggling, the direction you are force marched rotates either clockwise or counterclockwise based on a debuff. And the cherry top to this milkshake is you need to end up with a buddy for a stack at the end of the movement. But also, make sure you don't leave any landmines on the ground, or have one person touch too many, or everyone explodes, otherwise known as
stand and let thing resolve.
Yes. I know this is a Criterion mechanic and not an Ultimate, but in general, this boss melts my mind trying to figure everything out while also doing damage, even more so than the stuff in Omega, at least from what I've experienced in the fight. But even for these more precise mechanics, many, but not all, have multiple ways to solve them. While generally this ends up being the difference of quick and dirty week 1 strats versus melee uptime. And because the patches are so short, it's only not even a full 8 months for each tier, and we get either a Criterion or Ultimate, or sometimes both, a little less than 4 months in, there isn't really a reason to explore other options, and what's even the point once your melees get full uptime. Though, sometimes it does make it a little difficult to actually PF when we're done raiding due to this fact. That there are multiple solutions, Since we here at the Uwu Avengers tend to do Savage blind, oftentimes our strats differ pretty substantially from PF. Now then, time to start talking mechanics. In content that has a full party, or in other words 8 people, you get access to Limit Break 3. And support Limit Break is so powerful, both healers and tanks can single-handedly salvage a run. But it's not strictly a recovery tool. Sometimes you can use tank limit break as mitigation during very damage intensive moments, like harrowing hell from this last Pandemonium tier. However, P10S is quite an anomaly of course, with how strong and rapid the raid wides are. But of course you can get through it without limit break. It just makes your healers have a panic attack because of the otherwise tight heal check, arguably a softened range. Because support LB is a lot more versatile in its use, I find it way cooler than doing 2% of a boss's health bar. Or more specifically, I think using melee LB3 is akin to a reward for not needing to use LB for a quick recovery and doing everything correctly. So obviously, I don't see using any LB as a form of cheese, no more than I see using invulns to avoid tank swaps cheese, or even ranged weapons or magic in Souls games. In all of these cases, it is simply using the tools the game gives you to solve whatever problem the designers throw at you. Though Limit Break has to be built up over the course of a fight, unlike Tank Invuln, so it's a little stricter in when it can be used. Well, that's not entirely accurate. Using a Limit Break because you don't want to or can't learn how to do something is most certainly a crutch to get through a fight, but I don't think that that's a problem. Looking at Serlin's book, Playing to Win, which can be found here, link in the description, he goes into the scrub mentality. Sure, this book is written with competitive games in mind, but it can easily be applied to this. The definition for this mentality is, quote, "The scrub mentality is to be so shackled by self-imposed handicaps as to never have any hope of being truly good at a game," end quote. But I like that later he explains that even some things go too far, in regards to making things unfair or literally break the game, such as causing the game to freeze or crash. Though, as this is a PvE game and not a competitive one, what constitutes as unfair should be extremely loose. And now that we've gone over that using tools given to you by the devs isn't cheese, let's take a couple steps back and work on a side dish. Which I'll start by asking a question. What makes content difficult? Or more precisely, how can designers tune difficulty higher or lower? I'll wait a few moments here to give you time to respond in the comments while the answer gets warmed up. Oh, and while you're down there, show that you care with a like and hopefully a subscription so that I know that I'm not just talking to myself. Alright then, it's done. Time to pull out the answer. Basically, any numeric slider can be tuned to increase difficulty. More damage, more health, faster casts, shorter fight duration, yada yada yada, the list goes on. These are easy to do, but if that's all you do, it's generally kind of boring. Which is kind of my problem with a lot of endless grind in ARPGs in disguise item world. Gotta grind for better stats and levels so you can survive fighting the same mobs with just more inflated numbers to survive those same mobs with even more inflated numbers and repeat this loop for near infinity. In regards to fight duration, 14 doesn't really have any hardened ranges in normal content. Maybe some ads that have to be dealt with before a bar fills, but you have to actively try to fail them in order to see it go off. I'm barely trying and it's still not even close. These things are super squishy, and this is in an expert dungeon. But when you get to extreme or above, they do add in hardened ranges to the fight, so you have to actually learn your rotation if you're looking to do the content on patch, which increases difficulty all by itself. Though the game is lenient enough to allow for mistakes, especially as you start getting more gear. But what I love about 14's difficulty is that normal mode is just the base for the extreme or savage version, where mechanics are remixed and more things are stacked on them. What might have static drop spots for AoEs in normal are baited by the party in savage, or instead of a 6 soak tower, there is now 1 for each person. But then, how do we push fights even further beyond? Wait, I used that joke before. Well, regardless if my references are reused or not, fights can only be tuned so much and still be clearable. I can't imagine anything being much more tightly tuned than top, without demanding specific party comps, even for juicers. Well, I did do a little lie by omission. There were other ways to increase difficulty that aren't just numerical sliders, because like previously stated, sliders can only be tuned so much. So to increase difficulty even more, Square can start to disable core universal mechanics. And I'm going to bring up a couple of these universal mechanics and how they are toyed with. A couple good and a couple bad examples. One of these universal mechanics is the limit break that I mentioned earlier, and the main reason I wanted to make this video. For the longest time, I found it perplexing and awful design that you couldn't use these in Ultimate. Otherwise you might not have it for the part in the fight where it's mandatory to progress. Though, I recently had an epiphany and realized why you can't. So here goes. Ultimates, without fail, have some mechanic that demands a specific limit break 3, but there's at least one forced tank LB, so you can't quote-unquote cheese some hard mechanic. And after having this epiphany, I love this design. It allows for limit break to be used while progging, but only up to the gate where the game turns and says, you must be at least this proficient to continue, and turns you away. The hardest content in the game should demand the most from the players, and offer as few safeguards as possible. Now of course, this is a team game at the end of the day, so being able to work together to shore up certain party members' shortcomings should be celebrated, such as having someone dedicated to reading nail quotes in UCOB, which is wholly different than having Cactbot do it for you.
Red is defamation. Red is defamation.
I'm showing this example of one of our polls to demonstrate that even the best shot callers can get something incorrect occasionally.
Red is defamation. What the fuck? What just happened?
What?
What the hell?
Huh?
Did you guys break the test?
And now, a bad example of increasing difficulty, even if I kind of understand why they did it. In the new Criterion dungeons, the game just arbitrarily makes it so you can't press a specific button on your hotbar. That button being the resurrection button, and instead everyone gets access to a duty action, to res. In Variant, it's unlimited use, but has a 30-second cooldown, which is fine, healers can still revive here. But since the content is made for 1 to 4, if you went double melee DPS and nothing else, you still have access to a means of revival. The problem I have with this comes when we move up to Criterion, and especially Savage. Because according to Yoshi, from what I remember at least, is that it's more likely for parties to only have one person with a revive skill compared to when you have at least 2 in standard comps for 8-man content. The res action in Criterion, instead of having a cooldown timer, changes to a single use per person which refreshes when you wipe or kill a boss. But when we do Savage, nothing about the dungeon changes except the res, which is just grayed out, which feels much more heavy-handed or forced. This dish doesn't feel quite finished. So how about another bad example? Another way to increase difficulty that, like many things, is fine in moderation, but an excess of a specific flavor can ruin a meal. But this last Savage tier for Endwalker binged this design decision like Scrooge McDuck diving into his gold. And that is the body check mechanic. Similar to a DPS check, a body check requires a certain amount of people alive at a specific time instead of a certain amount of damage per second. Or at least one other person will die, but it's usually the entire party dies. Like in P9S for example, when he does the fire or lightning elements, if one person is dead when the cast goes off, at least one other person will die, and that's fine enough, I guess. Or better yet, what's that thing called? Limit cut? Yeah, sure, we'll go with that. If someone dies during this, then likely everyone dies. Or in P10S, there are so many enumerations that without all 8 people alive, the ensuing body check very shortly after will begin the death spiral and it never stops without a healer limit break. Now, like the intro to this topic hinted at, I like these types of checks when done in moderation. And it's still fine enough if only one other person gets punished, like with the elements in P9S. But I also get that if it's you, it can be a little frustrating to eat dirt through no fault of your own. If an entire fight is just body check into body check, the entire party has to play near perfectly, and there's almost no room for recovery. So we once again might as well just remove combat res from the game. It's also mentally exhausting and going to cause strife in groups because everyone will pick it up at their own speed and the group is locked into going at the worst player's pace. Now sure, having so many body checks does make it a lot harder to get carried through difficult content, while players have the back.
If you're a WoW Raider, you stay here. You don't move. If you're a WoW Raider, you stay there.
Oh, on God. Fucking
All the
up.
WoW Raiders stay back. We're going to the right, FF players. To the right. See ya, WoW players. Let's do jails. We only have the people that know how to do it.
But I would rather have that than the no chill zone we got at the end of Pandemonium. Now finally, to put the top slice of bread on this proverbial sandwich, some fights mess with your ability to move freely. Ice-based bosses like Shiva can ice the floor under your feet, so without using movement abilities, when you press in any direction, you slide a set distance in that direction. This distance can of course also be tuned to go from a minor nuisance to instant death, which they really should have done for Caloric 1 at least, if not also Caloric 2. Not only would the mechanic make way more sense with readability without changing the limited movement, as a single tap would give 1 extra stack versus the 9 yalms, unless it's the first time you move where you get a stack almost instantly for some reason. But if they iced the floor and it didn't send you very far, maybe, I don't know, 9 yalms, there would be no taking an accidental extra step and blowing everyone up, and you'd still only be able to take 2 movements, with the third either blowing you up or sending you flying off the stage as if you got hit by a wind. Assuming, of course, movement skills like Shikuchi still ate one of those 2 movements. I'm not going to bring up Forced March or Forced Teleports because they functionally act the same as Icy 4, Smile. But there are other ways to mess with movement that the game utilizes that is functionally distinct, though it's a lot less common. First introduced, at least to my recollection, in Rabanaste, the final boss Argath casts Misdirection on the raid. What this does is let you go only forward, but forward is constantly changing direction, as evident by the spinning pointer, though it does stop spinning while you're in motion. Hopefully, this never comes to difficult content because oh god is it so difficult to handle with precision, but it is fun for lower stake or fun things like Fall Guys. It seems this meal is finally finished. As per usual, if I had missed anything, let me know. And while this topic started off with me wanting to gush about how 14 can mess with its universal mechanics to increase difficulty, a proper dinner requires sides to go with the main dish. And figure it would be a perfect opportunity to talk more about Criterion in oh so many body checks, and hopefully tone some things down in Dawn Trail. And thank you for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed the meal,